Let me welcome everybody to our Biodesign 20th anniversary. We had a certainly wonderful introduction to a career from Parag, and now we'll transition to folks that have passed through Biodesign in one way or another, either as students, faculty, or others. So our first speaker today is Dr. Brian Johnson. Dr. Johnson completed his PhD working here at Biodesign with Professor Bertram Jacobs in 2018 and is currently a Presidential Management Fellow at the National Cancer Institute. The talk will be titled Dr. Strangejob, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Alternative Career Paths. Now, one thing I'll ask you to do, if you are going to ask a question, make sure you wait for a microphone. We're trying to record this, and the microphones are necessary to get things on the recording. Thanks. Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's after graduating, I ended up moving to Maryland, so it's I haven't been back at ASU in a while, so it's really interesting how much the North Campus has changed. I like that there's a new bridge crossing university now, so it's all easier to get across. But yeah, so I love that first talk because it really ties well with I've had a not quite as exciting a career path, I'll say, but nevertheless, I want to talk a little about alternative career paths. So first, a very important disclaimer so I don't get in trouble at work, but I am here today in my personal capacity. Any views expressed here are my own and do not reflect the opinions of the National Cancer Institute or the United States government. I don't think I'm going to say anything that spicy, but got to be safe. So so here's me in 2017, working in Dr. Jacobs' lab and working on MPOX, which turned out to be surprisingly relevant in recent years. And that's me getting ready to go into the animal BSL-3 suite to do some pathogen research. Fast forward a few years, and now I'm working in the budget office, which I definitely did not see coming if you had asked me where I would be after graduating. But despite this unexpected turn of events, I've been very happy and fulfilled with what's happened. But how did that happen? How do you go from doing pathogen research to process maps and process improvements and Excel hustling? And a lot of it started in 2012. Folks from my cohort will recognize this figure. This is a publication that came out where they mapped what happens to life science PhD students, and it turns out, really, this is a busy chart, but probably the most relevant thing for us was fewer than 8% of people become tenure-track research faculty, which is a problem if your goal is to become tenure-track research faculty. So it's like, oh dear, the odds don't look good there. And this was kind of compounded by a later study, this was from 2013, looking at how many PhD students and PhD graduates are produced versus how many faculty jobs there are. And unfortunately, looking at this chart, the blue line is number of PhDs, and the orange line is how many jobs there are. If it was reversed, things would be amazing, but unfortunately, it's a very difficult jobs market. Jake and I were just talking about this the other night. He's produced 40 graduate students, 40 PhDs in his career. Are there 40 new faculty positions since he started? I don't think so. So, you've got to think about what's plan B. So, given how incredibly, competitive, faculty positions were, I said, rather than going for this really highly competitive adversarial space, I'm going to go for highly competitive and adversarial space, and applied to two different fellowship programs that really caught my eye, the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship and the Presidential Management Fellowship. And what drew me to these programs is the idea behind them is to take people with advanced graduate degrees and embed them in government, possibly to end up with full federal careers, but sometimes it's just, hey, bring you in, you contribute for a time, and then you go off and do other things. So people I think there are people in this audience who've done the AAAS fellowship and have come back to doing amazing research, but with a deeper understanding of how federal government and life there translates and back and forth. So I was really interested in these a lot because of some of the extracurricular activities I did. So I wasn't juggling or doing a magician, but I was doing STEM outreach. So folks in this room have probably gotten emails from me periodically asking for folks to come out to Phoenix Fan Fusion every summer where we do science outreach. So we bring in scientists to talk about the science of Iron Man and so on. And it's tons of fun. We get about 100 scientists and thousands of attendees. And so that got me interested in not just what's happening in the lab and the bench, but what's the connections around people and bringing that all together. So I was really interested in policy and things like that. So long story short, I got into the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, and I was recruited to the National Cancer Institute, where I did a series of rotations and got to work in some really interesting offices doing some really interesting projects. So initially, I was in the Coordinating Center for Clinical Trials. This is the office that coordinates clinical trials. And one of the things they do is they maintain a database of all of the clinical studies that NCI supports. So if you do go to cancer.gov and look up clinical trials, you're using this office's database. And one of the things they were and are really interested in is, how do we make this database work better? How do we give people the tools that they can find the exact clinical study they need for their cancer that they can actually get to? How do we make the underlying architecture work better? How do we make the user interface better? How do we make the analysis we do better? So that was a really interesting, exciting project. I did a stint at the Office of Research Integrity of Health and Human Services, where I was working on problems of digital data management and maintaining lab records. My third was at the NCI Office of Budget and Finance, and I was kind of imagined as sort of, throwaway is the wrong word, but it was more of a, this isn't a career endpoint, I'm gonna learn more about the federal budget that's gonna be relevant for whatever comes next, and I'll be done. And spoiler tag, that's where I work now. So that ended up being a lot more than just an interesting learning experience. And I did a stint then at the Center for Cancer Training, where we worked on policies around graduate students and postdocs and really understanding what are ways we can help bridge the power gap between trainees and faculty. Because if you're a graduate student or a postdoc, it's not just a job. You're a student, but you're an employee. You need those letters of recommendations your whole career. So it's a very vulnerable position to be in. And what are things we can do to better support trainees so that they're in a better position and can really succeed? And then the last was at the President's Cancer Panel, where they do, this is a panel of experts the president convenes to give recommendations on policy around cancer and cancer research. So what are some high-level strategies that can be done to move the needle forward in cancer amelioration? So all of these things, these are all interesting projects, but I didn't really have to do Western blots or pipette anything. I didn't have to put on a bunny suit to go in. Even during COVID, the mask was enough. They didn't make me wear a BSL-3 suit. So, did I really, did any of my time at ASU really contribute to that work? Well, the answer is no, and I want my money back. No, of course not. There are a lot of, really important lessons I learned in my time here, and a couple I want to share. One really important one is don't be intimidated by complexity. So the figure on the left is the gene regulatory network for C-section embryo development. The figure on the right is the regulatory network for buying something in the Department of Defense. Don't worry, there is a simplified process that you can use that only cuts out maybe half of those steps. So, but also, if you can take a look at that figure on the left and okay, you follow the map and understand it, you can work out the one on the right. And by able to think about, really complex, difficult problems, you can say, okay, how can we leverage this network to achieve the ends we want in doing our, biology research? Or how can we streamline and make that process on the right more efficient? Where are the weak points? Where can we use software to streamline things? Are there steps we could cut out? And so really embracing complexity as a challenge, not a problem, has been very helpful. Complexity, to be fair, you're going to find that in any, well-established research institution. However, what I think Biodesign, the Biodesign graduate program and the Biodesign Institute really excel at is, embracing collaboration and interdisciplinary work. you need a team of people to do work well. So the figure on the left was the 2013, all the folks who were in the biological design PhD program at the time. And, the program was recruiting biologists, chemists, engineers, people with more of an interest in business, and, bringing us all into this program together so we could do and learn how to work together and communicate in interdisciplinary manners. The Biodesign Institute itself, the open air space where you can run into people in other labs doing completely different work instead of having separate, individual rooms with the doors locked and people glaring at each other to stay away from the reagents. You have this open plan where people can see and communicate with each other, which leads to exciting collaborations that might not have been expected. And so all this, you find, I find in the public sector as well, that we are, these are really complicated issues we're dealing with, at all the different offices I've worked in, and being able to work with people and say, hey, this is my expertise, my background, I can contribute really strongly in this, but I can't do all this on my own. I can't figure out, the cancer budget on my own. You need teams of, intelligent, professional, dedicated people to do it, and you need to, bring in everything you can 100%, and you need to trust that your colleagues are doing the same. And so this, that training environment here really fostered that and has made the transition to doing, public sector work so much easier. And the last one I'll talk about is rising to challenges. So the figure on the left is a really hideous Western blot, which I never got bothered to get a cleaner one because, and Jake might recognize this, this is one where I was doing a hybridization experiment, and I figured, what, it's been a couple of months, I better do a validation to make sure that my hybrid didn't revert. Guess what that shows? So I found out that my, basically the hybrid I thought I was characterizing wasn't what I was characterizing, and I found this out at 9 p.m. the night before a committee meeting, which was fun. So I had a brief nervous breakdown, called up Dr. Jacobs, was like, hey, I have some news for my committee meeting tomorrow, but we, moved past this, came up with alternate approaches, alternate dissertation chapters, and I was able to graduate despite that setback. The figure on the right was a fun thing that we encountered where we were trying to do an assay to do a particular immunofluorescence assay, and everybody in the literature used this one antibody to probe this, and they got beautiful, beautiful pictures with them. Like, what, I want to have this assay in my paper. So I start looking up to find this antibody, and it doesn't exist anymore. Why? Because the company that manufactures it's no longer allowed to have goats, and it was a goat polyclonal antibody. Well, oh dear. So had to come up with alternate assays again. So, these things with, some of them are self-inflicted, like I should have been doing validation experiments throughout. I shouldn't have been, caught like that months in. I should have been doing that regularly to keep that from happening. But on the right, I don't have any control on what this other company's doing or what deals their lawyers are negotiating. I have no power over that. But nevertheless, you work through, you persist. And I think that's a really key aspect of doing good science is, when you encounter a roadblock, you either figure out your way through it or you go around it, but you keep moving. And that's been so important where, the kind of challenges, the specifics of specific challenges you encounter are different, but that same underlying principle that there's going to be some crazy roadblock. Oh, there's a regulation you didn't realize exists. There's some other office that already does this thing, and so you need to negotiate with them on how to do it. So that, that persistence in the face of adversity is so important in everything and not just STEM research. And, going through a PhD really helps foster that skill and mindset. So, going now to switching, more to the public sector, what are some of the challenges I've faced? And some of my rotations and offices I've worked in. So at the Office of Research Integrity, the big problem was, how do you preserve research records in an increasingly complex digital landscape? So, research records aren't just on your lab notebook now that you photocopy and you say, cool, I have my lab notebook, I photocopied the pages, I'm good. There's data on the lab computers, including that computer from 1995 that's the only one that controls the microscope, and it's not connected to the internet because IT will freak out at you, so you can only get data off of it with a floppy disk. How do you get data out of there? How do you back it up? What happens about lab data? Does the lab have the funding to give everybody in the lab, including the graduate students, their own work laptops? If not, they've probably got some of their data at their personal laptops. How do you recover that? Is everybody using the university network and Dropbox, or are they using their own system to track it? Are they emailing data files back and forth? And it becomes this, what seems like a simple problem, how do we back up our data, is actually incredibly complex with no real easy answers. And so that was a really interesting project to work on. At the President's Cancer Panel, the focus of the panel took that year was to study and give advice on cancer screening, which is such an important part in improving cancer outcomes, is screening. So they decided to do cancer screening as their focus in, I think, late 2019. And then 2020 was disruptive there as well. And one of the big things that happened among all the other big things that COVID caused was people weren't getting their regular cancer screenings anymore. People weren't going to the doctor. So you had this chunk of time where large portions of the population were not getting their regular cancer screens, and so cancer that might have been detected is not detected now. It's delayed at being detected, which leads to worse outcomes. So how do you come back from that? How do you train medical staff in newer techniques and technologies that are coming out? How do you work with insurance companies and medical records companies to come up with better ways to share and communicate and encourage screening data? Now, these are also not easy questions. And then the last one I'll talk about, which is what I've been spending my career now at the budget office at NCI, is how to effectively manage the budget. So this figure is from the cancer website, NCI's website, and showing the percent breakdown of the NCI budget. And so if you look at it, about 75% is in extramural funding. So that's everything that goes out. That's grants, it's contracts, it's cancer centers, all that work that we get the money, Congress gives us money, and we push it out to the world to do great research. Then there's, the remaining 25% is the intramurals, is internal. So about 18% of that is intramural research. So that's the labs that NCI itself is running. So the idea of there being, maybe high risk, high reward research, that'd be hard to get with the grant, but you're supporting faculty at the NCI to do great research. And then 7 to 8% is building and facilities and research management and support. And that's the boring administrative stuff that nobody likes. That's paying salaries, it's buying computers, it's keeping the buildings running. And and so kind of everything you do is, well, every dollar that goes into research management and support is not money that's not going to actual science. And so how can we use our limited budgets and squeeze every dollar out to make sure that we're working as efficiently and effectively as possible? And it's been and so a lot of my work has been on how do we make our systems work better along those lines. So to give an example, the kind of challenges you face is what should, again, be a pretty simple question. How do you, one of the things we have to do is we have to accurately report our spending to Congress, which, makes sense. They gave us the money. We need to tell them how we spent it. So I'm going to give a very, simplified example. Suppose that you needed to report to the dollar how much you spend on food each year. The IRS is very nosy about it for some reason. So the most obvious way would be just take all your receipts over the course of the year, look at them, itemize them, and say, okay, I got food here and here, here, and add it up. That would work, it would be accurate, but it'd be extremely inefficient. And time-consuming, would take a lot of hours and labor to do. So that's not going to work. Option 2, you could put it all on a credit card, because credit cards have this cool thing where they say, okay, you went to Fry's. Fry's is a grocery store, so everything you bought there is going to be in the food bucket. You went to the gas station, so that's going to be the transportation bucket. So you put it all in there and you're done. Well, the problem is most stores sell things that cross categories. You go to Fry's, you could buy an apple. An apple's food. You buy crayons. Crayons probably aren't food, unless you're at U of A. And so the third approach that kind of gets you kind of the best and worst of both worlds is to have dedicated accounts for spending. So say, okay, I'm going to have an account for food. So when I go to Fry's, I'm going to pull out my credit card and I'm just going to put my food purchases on there. Like, oh, I need to buy some office supplies. Okay, the office supplies are going on this credit card. So you do this, and great, you have an easy way to track how much is in each bucket. Problem is now you got to keep track of all your accounts. And it's not just, food and office supplies. There's many, many different things that you need to keep track of. And also you need to distinguish between money you spent this year and money you spent last year. And also you're getting money from your regular job, but you're also getting gifts and donations. And sometimes Congress just gives you other special money that you have to spend particular ways. And so it's not a matter of 5 credit cards. You have credit cards for all these other dimensions. And also, every office gets their own set of credit cards too. And so you end up with hundreds and thousands of accounts you need to track. How do you do that in a way that's effective so that people know which accounts they need to track and, and pick the correct ones? And so some of the work we've been doing is developing tools and systems to make that easier. So instead of everybody having their own list of accounts, there's now one central account that everybody can use. It's one of those things that doesn't sound particularly sexy compared to proteomics and microarrays, but it's really important work where if we get this right, we don't need to spend a ton of money on the boring administration stuff, and it can instead go to where it really matters and to the mission. And that's the biggest goal is how do we keep the lights on as efficiently as possible so that we can give everything we possibly can to the community to make sure that great science happens at Biodesign and everywhere else. So, in conclusion, the unique skills fostered in environments like the Biodesign Institute are really in high demand in the public sector and other places. And there's a great deal of important and interesting work that needs to happen that can be waiting to be solved by someone like you. And finally, I'll do my shameless plug that it's getting around the time where we start planning our science outreach at Phoenix Fan Fusion, so look out for emails from me because I'm going to start recruiting folks to start talking about science. And if you come along, you might be able to meet a ring wraith, a Godzilla with a lightsaber. That's not going to cause any problems. A dwarf, or maybe even help carry a crocodile. The world is your oyster. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Dunson. That was great, and that actually validates something I always tell students. You really don't get a degree in chemistry, as I did. You get a license to think, and then you can go think about all kinds of really interesting things along the way. But you really are given the tools here to think. Okay, we have time, I think, for one question, so wait for the microphone and questions.
How did you solve the problem regarding data collection?
Sorry, the data collection. So that's that's one of the things where covers the limitations of the federal space work. So we can't just say this is what you need. Yeah, microphone. So let me start over. So you're talking about the data collection for data management for lab records. Okay.
Yeah, like lab records.
Yeah. So basically what we did was we put together basically a set of recommendations that boils down to it's too broad and complicated a topic to have just here's a solution, do this. It's not appropriate to say buy this software package and do X, Y, and Z. But what we basically said is if your institution is thinking about this when a problem's happened, it's too late. You need to be having these conversations well in advance and figure it out. So working with the researchers, the IT department, and everybody to come up with a plan. And it can't be oh no, we have an issue come up and we need to look at our records from 1997 and we can't find them now. You need to be proactive and think about them and come up with a solution that's best for your institution. And what that looks like from institution is going to vary widely based on size and resources. But I think it kind of boiled down to you need to figure it out now and not when it's too late.